All right, God bless everybody. Today the topic is the power of persistence. Now, from all my studies and observations, there is one quality and one quality alone that propels us all the way into our goals. And that one thing is persistence. Persistence is a value that all successful people have found a way to integrate into their lives and into their fortunes. What is persistence? Persistence is to continue where others quit. Persistence is to exist longer than the usual person. Persistence is tenacity, perseverance, doggedness, being bullheaded in a good way. To have firm resolve, diligence, being resolute, and as Jesus said in Luke 11, to be importune. Persist until you see your success. The word persistence is never used in the Bible simply because it wasn't even invented till the 1500s. And the mindset of persistence is woven through the entire Scripture and radiates in the lives of every successful man or woman. When speaking about persistence, the 30th President of our United States, Calvin Coolidge, said, quote, "Nothing in this world can take the place of persistence. Talent will not. Nothing is more common than an unsuccessful man with talent. Genius will not. Unrewarded genius is almost a proverb. Education will not. The world is full of educated derelicts. Persistence and determination alone are omnipotent." End of quote. If we can learn to develop this trait into our personal success life cycle, we too will tap deeply into the supply of God. And this big old universe, everything it's given us is just buried right below the surface. Now, there's a man named Oliver Martin and his buddy John Fowler. And they were childhood friends, and they grew up and became business owners. Now, along with 300,000 others, they rushed to California with the dream of making their fortunes by discovering gold. Now, a side note, of those 300,000 men who headed west to find gold, 100,000 never lived long enough to return home. 1/3 lost their lives in the pursuit. Now, Oliver and John, they loved to drink as much as they liked dreaming of striking it rich. And they got drunk one night and ended up falling asleep in their camp located deep in a gully. And that night, the largest rainstorm of the year flooded their camp and swept the two men downriver while they were sound asleep. Now, Oliver awoke the next morning, and to his surprise, he found himself stuck in a tangle of trees, but found his buddy John drowned and dead and washed up on the riverbank. Now, while Oliver was digging the grave to bury his longtime friend, he discovered the largest gold nugget anyone had ever found the first 3 years of the California gold rush. The nugget he found weighed in at 151 pounds, and today it would be worth over $3 million. Oliver's persistence, coupled with a healthy dose of dumb luck, made him a rich man. Even though he found the gold when he was digging a grave for his best friend, he was still digging. He was digging all the time. Oliver never stopped digging. Oliver was persistent, to say the least. Now, we too should never lose focus, never stop digging, no matter what bad thing just happened, until we find our mother lode. The supply is already there. We just need to have the patient persistence to find it. That's the power of persistence. See, failures are just down payments on our future success. Now, none of us like to fail, but we all do at times. Yet the people who persist in the face of setbacks have rooted within themselves a deep, unwavering faith, a persistence that will always pay off if they just keep showing up for work. When most people run into rejection or obstacles, they think it's a sign. It's not worth it. It's God telling me something. It's time for me to quit. But when super performers run into rejection, they know that their short-term sacrifices are just deposits on their future success. Like you, ultra performers know that sometimes we get paid in learning, while at other times we get paid in earnings. Failures are nothing more than the down payments on our future successes. Lieutenant Onoda, Apanda, and the Abominable Snowman. Now let me tell you the story of two men who were persistent to a fault. One made it his life's mission to keep an order, while the other doggedly chased his dream. Then their paths crossed. In the mid-1960s, I was a kid living near an Air Force base in Tokyo, Japan. And each and every month, our Boy Scout troop faithfully went on campouts in some deep and always rainy woods. And we used Army surplus gear from World War II and the Korean War. Old ponchos, combat packs, pup tents, canvas leggings for what I don't know, yet we still wore them, and stale sea rations. Now everything smelled like it had been used hard and put away wet, probably because it was. And we looked just like our equipment smelled. We looked like wet, shrunken soldiers with high-pitched voices. Now, around the campfire one night, I heard a story that intrigued my freckled little mind. And we were told there were Japanese soldiers who had never surrendered. They were still living in the woods, still fighting World War II. Now, I didn't know if it was true, but if it was, I thought I would sure like to find one of those guys. So we always kept an eye out as we were exploring. Well, I later learned that the story was in fact true. And in the 60s, there was a handful of Japanese soldiers who, for the 20 years since the war, hadn't yet surrendered. And these faithful warriors weren't hiding out in Japan, but they were holed up in the jungles of the Philippines. They were still maintaining their mission, still holding fast to their order to never surrender. In 1944, Second Lieutenant Hiru Onoda was sent to the small island of Lubang in the western Philippines to spy on U.S. forces. And he was ordered to never surrender and to never kill himself. To him, an order was sacred. A command from a higher authority to him was as if it was from the divine God. See, they built bamboo huts. They pilfered rice and other food from local villages and killed cattle that they stole just so they could have the meat. And they were tormented by tropical heat, by rats, bugs, mosquitoes. They patched their tattered uniforms and always kept their rifles in working order. Believing themselves to still be at war, they avoided American and Filipino search parties. They even attacked and killed about 30 islanders whom they assumed to be enemy guerrillas. And as the war finally came to an end, most of the Japanese troops on the island surrendered to the American forces. But Onoda and his band of persistent holdouts hid out in the small jungle island on which they'd been ordered to stay. And they dismissed any message dropped from airplanes informing them in Japanese that the war was over, believing it to be nothing more than propaganda. So for the next 29 years, Onoda lived off the land as well as stealing food from local farmers. And the Japanese government and his family were told that he was dead in 1959. So nobody was looking for him anymore. In 1974, a young college dropout changed everything. This persistent young Japanese hippie had a short-lived list of 3 life goals, and he was going to reach them or he was going to die trying. Now, upon hearing there was no search party ever located Lieutenant Onoda, Norio Suzuki decided to become a full-time explorer and to find the stubborn warrior. So he quit college and he decided to leave Japan and find Onoda. And he said he was going to search for 3 things: Lieutenant Onoda, a panda, and the abominable snowman, in that order. End of quote. So the kid was focused. So he packed his bag, he booked his flights, and stepped into the jungle. Now, Noriya Suzuki was not military trained, nor was he an outdoorsman, nor was he trained in search and rescue, nor was he a detective or a policeman, nor had he ever ventured into the woods to find and bring home an armed and very dangerous man. He was not trained to handle this task, but he was persistent. Within 2 days, young Suzuki found the grizzled Onoda, who had evaded professional search parties for almost 30 years. And when Onoda was located by the youngster, he was ready to shoot Suzuki at first sight. Fortunately, Suzuki had read up on this fugitive and quickly shouted out to the older Onoda, "Onoda-san, the emperor and the people of Japan are worried about you." Onoda later described this moment in a 2010 interview with an Australian journalist named Mark Willency. Quote, "The hippie boy Suzuki came to the island to listen to the feelings of a Japanese soldier. Suzuki asked me why I would not come out. I said that if the war was over and I received an order telling me to stop fighting, I would come out. So Suzuki brought my commanding officer to Labang, and he did just that." End of quote. Onoda would not surrender until he was ordered to surrender by his superior officer. So Suzuki went back to Japan, told his story, was believed, and came back to the island with Onoda's old retired military officer who was now worked in a bookstore, and he brought the lieutenant's own brother who had thought he was dead. Onoda finally surrendered his sword to the Philippine president Ferdinand Marcos after his 30-year war and finally returned to Japan to a hero's welcome. Now, finding Japan had become so westernized and lacked its morals and pre-war ethics, Onoda moved to Brazil and started the cattle ranch that he had long fantasized about. And he heard about it because he had stolen a small shortwave radio and had heard a broadcast one time saying that they were a group of Japanese expatriates doing cattle ranching in South America. So he had another dream in his mind too that kept him going. He lived 2 years after the last one of his men died in the jungle, all by himself. And that's in 1974, that's when Suzuki found him. Suzuki scratched one goal off his list. He had found Lieutenant Onoda. And it didn't take him long to find a wild panda bear. And he even said that one time when he was in the Himalayas, he sighted an abominable snowman, but he had no proof. He got married and then in 1976 or something, and then later on in 1986, he went back to the Himalayas again in search of the abominable snowman and got swept away in an avalanche. Onoda's sense of duty and Suzuki's sense of adventure may have been misdirected, but there's a lesson we can all learn. Persistence pays off. Persistence pays off. Onoda's loyalty to old Japan overrode his feelings of extreme loneliness and whatever hardship he had to face to live in the woods alone for 30 years. I guess he had a few men at one time. He never lost focus, and he lived to tell about it. And he also lived into his 90s, this guy. Suzuki's pure laser focus and stubborn tenacity of wanting to find Onoda, a panda, and a yeti allowed him to accomplish something no one else had ever been able to do. He quickly, remember in 2 days, he found and brought home the last soldier who was fighting World War II. He found something that nobody else had been able to find because he was persistent. It was one of his 3 life goals. Through sheer persistence, one man's war was finally over and the other's adventure finally began. Both men were stubborn, tenacious, tireless, resolute, and intensely persistent. And their persistence reminds me of a few famous persistent people in the Bible. Adam, According to the Bible, Adam lived 930 years. Now, folks, that's a long retirement to fund. I work as a financial planner, and I try to help people figure out how they can save enough to live a short 20 or 30 years after retirement. But to live 930 years takes a lot of believing, to stay healthy, as well as to have continued wealth. Whatever that meant to Adam. Adam was persistent. Now, abundance was all Adam ever knew. And Adam totally expected and fully experienced absolute dominion over the physical earth for who knows how long. Adam didn't convince himself that he would die at 90 or 100 like so many of us do today. Now, during World War II, people were told that the life expectancy of an adult male was 64 years. And so how long did most people live? 64 years. Because they were told that's how old they were going to live. You all know stories of people who knew they were going to die at a certain time, and they did. Now we're told that we should expect to live into our mid to late 80s, maybe 90 if you're lucky. And so many people do. Today, more and more people are becoming centenarians, living way past 100. Now, I seldom sell a life insurance policy to anyone that covers them for less than 120 years. 20 years ago, the number was 100. Something's changing, folks. There's one small village in Italy that has over 300 people who are over 100 years old. And is it the Mediterranean diet? Partly. Is it genetics? Somewhat. Is it the lovely weather? Possibly. You know, could it be combined with the believing expectation and persistent conversation where they might say in the town, we here in Accaroli, Italy, live a long time, most certainly. Well, you know, I mean, if everybody in your town's living long, don't you think you might want to live longer? So what have we done to ourselves? Adam had it right. He fully expected God to prosper him and to take care of his body, and Adam thought it would happen forever. He never thought he would die. Even he and his main squeeze Eve, even after he and his main squeeze Eve blew it so royally, he still expected to prosper his entire life and to live who knows how long. My God, if the timing is what biblical scholars say it is, he lived 1/6 of the time humans have even been on earth. True humans. It took 930 years for him to convince himself or for his loving family to beat into his head that it was time to give up. Adam lived about 12 modern lifetimes, saw about 47 generations of grandchildren because he persisted mentally. What about you? What about me? What about us? What about Job? I love the story of Job because of his laser focus and stunning results. I love reading about him. Christians talk and talk and talk about the patience of Job and all that he had to suffer through. But I think about the insistent persistence of Job. Job went from being the richest man in the world, owning and running multiple businesses, and the father of 10 grown children, to losing everything in one day's time, including his 10 kids. Now, what did he do with his head? Death was so prevalent, so pervasive at that time, so fresh in the conversations that he had with his wife and friends, that even his spouse once told him, "Curse God and die. Just curse God and die." Mrs. Job: "Jay, it's time to just hang it up. There's no reason to live since the kids are gone." Job: "What?" Mrs. Job: "I said it's time to give up. You're already sitting in a pile of ashes. It's time to take that long dirt nap, and I'll do it with you." By the way, where's that God that you said would prosper you? Where did he run off to? Why don't you just curse that God and just die? I'm so hurt and I'm so tired. Let's just do this thing together, Job. Job, what? I can't hear you. You're talking way too much. All I can see in my mind's eye is 10 more beautiful children and an even more prosperous business. Why don't you come on over here a little closer and I'll show you a little surprise I've got for you that might brighten up your day. Mrs. Job, oh, Job, that's what I'm talking about. You know, he had to convince her. He had to convince himself. He would have never had double income and 10 more kids if he didn't have his wife doing it with him. What an amazing focus. What an amazing example of persistence. Somehow Job pulled his head out and refocused his mind. He then built and locked into a new vision for his life, and his wife rode the wave with him. His focus was so persistent, so invasive, so integrated into his daily thoughts that within a few his wife had 10 more children and he doubled his previous income. So you're telling me you're stuck? Try a little more persistence. You telling me you can't figure out how to get healed? Try a little more persistence. You telling me that you can't find that perfect somebody? Try a little more persistence. Be dogged. See, that boy was persistent. Job was persistent, and so are you. Persistent focus, tenacious goals, unrelenting action toward those goals, and always using failure as a springboard was Job's success strategy. Job lived to 140 years and saw his grandchildren, and from those recent 10 kids, and he saw them down to the 4th generation. Now, that's not bad. Not bad. Hebrews 11 goes through a running list of men and women who, against all odds, persisted until they succeeded. And here's just a few. You've heard of Abel. He was the man with a beautiful heart for God. So amazing was his persistent focus on enjoying God's abundance that his older brother killed him in a jealous rage. But God remembered him. And he's written in Hebrews 11. You know, Enoch was the man who pleased God. And so special was his persistence that his family and friends were spared from ever seeing him die. So God blessed the people around him, as well as blessing him because he was so faithful and persistent. Noah was a man who kept a positive focus during the most negative, deadly, and worst time in human history, far worse than today. Remember, every imagination of their hearts was evil continually. All they could think about is death and mayhem and destruction and selfishness. But he built this huge boat that God had told him to build. He's had to store the food. He had to protect that food. He had to store the feed. He had to protect the feed. He had to have enough supplies to last an ark full of animals as well as 8 people for 1 year and 10 days, plus enough to plant the crops after they landed. It had to be probably 2 years worth of supplies if the flood was like we think. Plus he had to buy huge tracts of forested land, hire workers, protect his family and workers from aggressively corrupt men, herd and corral thousands of wild animals, and protect those storehouses of food for who knows how long. Noah was one tough motor scooter. Noah's persistent believing focus was so etched into his heart that his actions followed, and so did the actions of the universe. As you move, the universe moves towards you, folks. You move toward God, he moves towards you. Abraham and Sarah were a couple who believed nothing was impossible. She believed to have that child that God, 25 years prior, had told her she would have. Now she's 75 years old. And Abe her husband was almost 100. Now that's not bad. As they say, good on them. You know, she's saying, come on, Papa, come to Mama. And Abe also had a vision of and spent his life looking for and trained his followers to look for a futuristic city God had showed him. And the revelation he received must have been incredible. And yes, they did have a child when she was 75 years old. Now Isaac was the man who helped mold the future of Israel by having the clear enough vision to choose the proper person to lead his family, which would someday become the children of Israel. Jacob was the man who finished strong. So strong was he that God changed his name from Jacob, which meant usurper or trickster, to the name of Israel, which means he will prevail just like God prevails. And God named him that. Your name is, you're going to prevail just like I prevail. And I say that God's given us that same name. You can prevail just like God prevails. This is a lesson that God's been trying to show us. We are incredibly powerful. We're incredibly gifted. And we're incredibly ready to receive these things. See, Joseph was the man who persisted on holding on to his calling, even after his brothers sold him into slavery. How would you like to be sold into slavery by your own siblings, to foreigners? Even after being thrown into prison later for not having sex with the jailer's wife, he worked his way up to becoming the second richest and second most powerful man on earth. From slavery to prison to the second most powerful man on earth, the one who directed the most powerful man on earth was Joseph. Joseph never compromised his calling. He simply walked with spiritual power that we should all enjoy. It's because he persisted when everybody else quit. Now the story of the persistent widow. The final short record is going to show us the mindset of persistence that success in anything requires. Jesus got it and wanted others to learn the benefits of persistent persistence. So Luke 18, we're going to read verses 1 through 8. And I'm going to read it from the Message. Jesus told them a story showing that it was necessary for them to pray consistently and never quit. He said, there was once a judge in some city who never gave God a thought and cared nothing for the people. A widow in that city kept after him. My rights are being violated. Protect me. A side note, a widow at that time, there was no welfare. There was nothing. They were totally without help unless somebody would take them on. And she wanted this judge, this judge of this city, to help her along somewhat. And he had the authority to do it. Verse 4, he never gave her the time of day. But after this went on and on, he said to himself, I care nothing what God thinks, even less what people think. Because this widow won't quit badgering me, I'd better do something to see that she gets justice. Otherwise, I'm going to end up beaten black and blue by her pounding. Sort of like that record we read in Luke 11 a couple of weeks ago, where Jesus was teaching his disciples how to pray. And he said, here's how you do it, man. He says, like a friend going to his friend's house and pounding on the door and saying, hey, man, I need some food to feed another one of my friends. He just showed up. And the friend who's in that house says, get away from me, man. It's late. Shut up. I'm in bed. And he just kept pounding. The guy kept telling him to shut up, and he kept pounding, and they kept telling him to shut up. And finally, the guy got up and gave him the bread. And Jesus said it wasn't because he's his friend. It's not because they're best buddies and neighbors. It's because of his importunity. It's because of his persistence. Because of his persistence, you get your prayers answered, folks. Because of persistence, you reach your goals. Because of persistence, everything good in life is going to happen. Verse 6, then the master said, do you hear what that judge, corrupt as he is saying? So what makes you think God won't step in and work justice for his chosen people who continue to cry out for help? Won't he stick up for them? I assure you, he will. He will not drag his feet. But how much of that kind of persistent faith will the Son of Man find on earth when he returns? Even Jesus saw that people were more and more getting away from believing or having misplaced believing. Why did Adam live 930 years? And now people barely make it to 80. Is it we're so much weaker? Is the food so much worse? Well, why do those people in Italy live way over? I think they talked themselves into it. They persistently talk themselves into living long. Whatever you persistently tell yourself is what you are. Whatever you persistently tell yourself is what you are. You know, the lesson here is to be persistently persistent against all odds. Be persistent through all the no's, through all the rejection. Be persistent through every obstacle and fully expect victory. The full power of the universe is behind you, folks. The full power of God is behind you. It's within you. Quote, I do not give up. I never give up, for there is nothing in this entire world that is irrevocably unchangeable. End of quote. Sri Chinmoy, and he's some Tibetan guy. I never give up. You know, there's nothing in this entire world that's irrevocably unchangeable. Folks, you can change your life right now. Put the work in. Put the time in. Be totally, irrevocably unchangeable in your persistence. Here's another quote. If you are going through hell, keep going. Winston Churchill. Just keep going. Keep going. Find yourself in a bad spot, keep going. You're going to get through it, folks. Quote, great works are performed not by strength, but by perseverance. Samuel Johnson. Great works are performed not by strength, but by perseverance. Everybody knows this. So like Oliver Martin, let's keep digging until we uncover the extreme treasure God has set aside just for you and just for me. Like Lieutenant Hiru Onoda and the hippie explorer Norio Suzuki, let's allow our persistent persistence to keep us going year after year after year through our darkest or brightest of times. We will never have to surrender if we're persistent. And like every great biblical man or woman, let's persist until we see success. And finally, like the record of the persistent widow who pushed until she was heard, let's remember that God is presently present and he has already set us up for success. God asks us to persistently push, push, push. To see the power of persistence, all we need to do is persistently pursue our passion. Like Job must have courted his grieving wife to get her to have 10 more kids, we, with the right attitude, excellent expectation, and dominating drive, we too will, as sure as the sun comes up in the morning, receive our promised abundance. We will see the supply and the power of God manifest in our life. Folks, that is the power of persistence. God bless you all.